paranoid android, I've got two things to tell you. One, she loves you. And two, live from Little Rock, it's Shane Plays Radio.
Welcome back to another episode of Shane Plays Radio, Geek Talk Radio, coming at you live and on the air on 96.5 FM, The Answer, out of Little Rock, hitting all of Central Arkansas. Of course, we're also online at 96.5 FM, theanswer.com, and on the iHeartRadio and TuneIn Radio apps on your smartphones. So no matter how you're listening, we're glad you're here. You can always call in and join me at 501-823-0965. I'm your host, Shane Stacks, of Shane Plays, and this is when I play, when I get 100% geeky. But anyway, you can call in at 501-823-0965. And you can also tweet me at Shane Plays. So either way, either method there will get you on the show if you have some questions or comments. Don't forget, we do have sponsors. We're so blessed to have them. I'm very, very pleased and blessed to have those sponsors. If you want to support the show personally, you can do it through Patreon, which is a way to offer a pledge per show to show that the community wants this show. And that's at patreon.com/ShanePlays. And if you go to ShanePlays.com, there's usually show notes and radio posts that have that link in there. Speaking of that, if you go to ShanePlays.com, right now the newest post on there has the notes and links for today's show. So as I'm talking about stuff, you can pull that up at ShanePlays.com and keep up with what I'm talking about, see the topics and any related links that you can visit. Last, don't forget that after this airs live, it goes out as a podcast, usually tonight or tomorrow. And you can find that at ShanePlays.com, and he posted there. And we're also on iTunes. So look for Shane Plays Podcast on iTunes. And now we're going to get right into the news. Today's going to be a cool show. Got news, which, you know, I like to do at the beginning of the show. Then I'm going to talk about the new edition, the 5th edition of Dungeons and Dragons, which I've been for several weeks now being a DM for. I'll give you my thoughts on it. And then we're going to have an interview. I'm really excited about this with Brian. And I think I'm saying this wrong. I'm saying it Bagnall, but I'm not sure that's perfectly right. We'll have him correct me when he gets on the air. And he writes books on the history of Commodore computers and the Amiga and all that. And a lot of people don't know the massive influence that these computers had, and they just don't get the credit. He's also big into Lego. So I don't know if we'll have a chance to talk about that today, but maybe we can talk to him another time about Lego. So that's what we got going on today. Remember, you can call in at 501-823-0965, or you can tweet me at Shane Plays. So here is the news. Right into the news. First off, if you love Star Trek, and who doesn't, there's a documentary film out there that Leonard Nimoy's son is trying to put together. It's called For the Love of Spock. And I know that some big names in Trek, like William Shatner and Zachary Quinto and some others, I think, have pushed their, hey, go support this, but it's a Kickstarter. The video is really interesting. And it's not quite funded yet, but it's getting close. So, if you want something like that, which I think that would be great to have a, documentary about Leonard Nimoy and the character Spock from his own son, I think that's just fascinating. So I hope people would support that. But that link is at shaneplays.com, or just search For the Love of Spock Kickstarter. Next, and this is pretty cool. We have I guess it's kind of a list, and this is for role-playing games, that the tabletop traditional role-playing games, EN World, which is run by a guy named Morris, or at least that's his Twitter handle, does a list of basically how it's almost like saying, you get these lists of the top video games, and this is a list of the hot role-playing games. So I can't go through them all, but the link is on my site. Go to search for enworld.com, and the name of the post is it says hot role-playing games. So you can get stuff anywhere from, they have it by hot role-playing games in general, and then they have it by variations of Dungeons and Dragons, which we'll be talking about later in the show, and then they have a combined list. So with Dungeons and Dragons removed, Like the big hot game there right now, number one is Fate, which I have to admit I'm not super familiar with. Call of Cthulhu is at number 4, Shadowrun is at number 6, etc. On just the D&D editions and variations, of course, 5th edition is number 1. Pathfinder is number 2, which Pathfinder is a variation of Dungeons and Dragons 3.5. 4th edition D&D is in 5th place, and then they have a combined list, and the number 1 is Dungeons and Dragons, the number 2 is Pathfinder, and the first entry on the list that is not D&D related is Fate. So this stuff is really interesting to me. So, definitely take a look at that, and check out ianworld.com if you never have, because it's a pretty darn good site. So, what other news do we have here to make you happy? There is a really cool parody. Kendall, this is if you could, here in a second, we're going to go to that I Want My RPG sound clip. But there's somebody did a parody of Money for Nothing by Dire Straits, which was a very popular song in the 80s. And they did it instead of I Want My MTV. Now it's I Want My RPG. So, Kendall, go ahead and kick that off. And it's really cool. You can find it on YouTube. Search for I Want My RPG by Miracle of Sound. And they did this, thanks, Kendall. They did this in conjunction with inXile, who is working on, they're doing a lot of great role-playing games, Torment, Tides of Numenera, Wasteland 2, and now they're working on Bard's Tale 4. So it's kind of in conjunction with that. Now, big news on video games, Batman Arkham Knight, which is a huge game. It's third in a very popular trilogy, came out on Tuesday. Now, people are saying it's a great game. People are loving it. But on PC, did you hear about this, Kendall?
No.
On PC, it's had so many problems. It had, on Steam, the PC version was mostly negative. When it says the review aggregation is mostly negative. Uh-huh. And 9,000, so many bad reviews that it dropped out of Steam. It lowered down in Steam because I guess there were so many technical problems with the PC port, to the point where Rocksteady, the company that did it, has said that they're not selling the PC version anymore right now.
Oh, man.
That's pretty big.
Yeah,
that's
huge, man.
And evidently they contracted out the PC port, so I'm not sure what happened there. But that's a pretty big deal, because that was a highly anticipated game. And it's also interesting. I don't know why I haven't played it. I've read about it a little bit, watched some videos. It's also M-rated. I don't know why it's M-rated. One of the developers said, yeah, we had to be M-rated to tell the story. I don't know why they're saying it needs to be M-rated. I think that's kind of uncool. Here's why. The first two weren't. Right? But now if you want to play the third one, you have to play an M-rated.
Wow.
But people will have different opinions on that. That's just one man's opinion in this great, big, wide world, Kendall. And speaking of Batman, there's this link. Go to shaneplays.com. It's linked in the show notes. I wish I could show this to you, but, radio is a theater of the mind. Some stuff we just can't describe. This guy did an amazing cosplay from Arkham Origins Batman. Not Arkham Knight, but Arkham Origins. And I think it's actually somebody who was involved with the design of the game. It looks amazing. So either go to shaneplays.com and click that link and check it out, or just search for Insane Batman Cosplay for Arkham Origins, and that'll pop up. All right, Kendall, are you familiar at all with the Fallout series?
Just a little bit.
Okay, well, in that game, the currency, it's sort of a post-apocalyptic, right? The currency is bottle caps in the game. So when you buy stuff or sell stuff or trade, you use bottle caps. Well, there's a new Fallout 4 coming out. A lot of people are super excited. And this guy's a huge Fallout fan. And for years, he's been collecting bottle caps because of Fallout.
Wow.
So he asked Bethesda, the people that are doing the game, he said, can I pay for the game with bottle caps? and they're letting him.
Really?
Yeah, just one. He said they're like, this is the only guy, only him.
Okay.
But because otherwise everybody's going to want to do a bottle caps.
Right.
But so it's fun for him and it's good PR for them, right?
Wow. Yeah.
But they said only him. So he's actually sent. It's like I think 11 or 12 pounds of bottle caps. Yeah. So yeah. So that's pretty. Again, that's linked on shaneplays.com. On TV news, kind of moving away from video games and role-playing games, and TV news, in the Flash TV show Season 2, Killer Frost and Vibe will be showing up in Season 2. Now, Professor Dr. Snow, who's part of the good guy team right now, she's going to become Killer Frost, he's a bad guy. She's got cold powers. So I don't know how that's going to work. And everyone's pretty sure that the character Cisco is going to become Vibe, who's in DC Comics for years. He's been around for years, at least since the 80s. He's a Hispanic superhero that has like vibratory powers, like he can shoot vibrations out of his hands. So that's probably what's going to happen there. Daredevil Season 2.
There you go.
Is there's news I just saw yesterday. I was actually on Dave Ellswick's show yesterday, and somebody called in about this, and then I saw the news item later. Daredevil Season 2 is referred to as Daredevil versus the Punisher by the showrunner. They get, and the showrunner is kind of the new term for the creative force behind a show, right?
Yeah, right.
So the Punisher is going to be in it, and it seems like their differences, like, because Daredevil won't kill, and that was the first season was him struggling with, do I kill or not?
Right, yeah.
The Punisher will kill. He'll just blast you. Like, he thinks, he's trying to shoot the bad guys, but so evidently there's going to be some tension there. And the first series of Daredevil on Netflix was excellent.
It was great.
It was done really. And the lovely Sheila, my wife, she's usually not into that stuff, and she really liked it. So we have a new Spider-Man actor for the new Spider-Man movie. His name is Tom Holland, and he was in a movie I think called The Impossible or something along those lines about people that were caught in the tsunami in 2006. So that and he's evidently Spider-Man's going to have a cameo in Captain America, the Civil War movie.
Yes, we were excited about that.
And then he's going to get his full-on own movie. So, last bit of news, and then we'll take a break and talk about Dungeons and Dragons, and then we'll have Brian Bagnall on, and I'm going to ask him how to pronounce that. I'm pretty sure I'm mispronouncing it. Are you ready? Are you ready for this, Kendall?
Bring it.
All right. Do you remember there's an old video game, and I think they've done console versions of it, but it's called Rampage, and
yes.
it's the Godzilla and the King Kong and the giant wolf man destroying. Okay,
all that. They're
making a movie out of it starring The Rock. I'm not lying. This is real. I'm not lying. I am not lying. This is true. So let me mention one other thing. I really don't have time to do this, but I want to throw it out there. I found and then we'll take a break. I found on Kickstarter last night, there's this game called We Happy Few, and it's about like being trapped in this sort of alternate version of a 1960s English town, and everyone's taking happy pills. And if you don't take your happy pills, they come after you. But it's called We Happy Few. And the reason I'm mentioning this, go look for We Happy Few on Kickstarter. The pitch video is one of the best pitch videos I've ever seen. It's really good. So whether you want to get the game or not, I think people should go watch that pitch video. I thought it was incredibly, and that's linked at shaneplays.com.
Okay.
Kendall, let's take a break, and when we come back, we're going to be talking about some Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. Privately owned and licensed by the Arkansas State Police, Rocksteady Alarm Company has been in business since 1996, specializing in sales, installation, servicing, and monitoring of burglar alarms and fire alarms for the state of Arkansas. Rocksteady Alarm provides service for residential and commercial alarms, and now provides cellular monitoring with remote arm and disarm. Just call John Hardiman at 501-541-8747. That's John Hardiman at 501-541-8747.
Comic book lovers, Michael Tierney's local comic book stores meet all of your comic book needs with friendly service. Visit the comic book store on Treasure Hill Road in Little Rock or Collector's Edition on JFK Boulevard in North Little Rock. And don't forget to click on over to the wildstars.com website. I personally have been a customer of Michael's since the mid-'80s, and I trust him for my reserve list still today. Michael knows comics. In addition to being in business for 34 years, he has written multiple columns for comic magazines, is an Overstreet price guide advisor, and publishes his own comic book series, The Wild Stars. Trust me, these stores are run by a comic book lover for comic book lovers. Remember, for all of your comic book needs with friendly service and to get your copies of The Wild Stars, make sure to visit the comic book store on Treasure Hill Road in Little Rock or Collector's Edition on JFK Boulevard in North Little Rock, and visit thewildstars.com to learn more.
All right, we're back. We're going to do a little bit of Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition, and then we're going to have Brian Bagnall on in about roughly 10 minutes to talk about the history of Commodore computers and the Amiga and just the massive influence they had. He's a really interesting guy. I've read his book. But first, we're going to talk about Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition, and here to introduce that is the actual Dungeon Master from the Dungeons and Dragons cartoon show. He's right here. Oh, thank you, sir.
I am Dungeon Master, your guide in the realm of Dungeons and Dragons.
Thanks, Dungeon Master. That was really nice of you for stopping by. He's such a nice guy. He just popped in and popped right back out, Kendall. He's crazy like that. So, what a nice guy. Now, if he could just get us back home to the real world, like those crazy kids have been trying to do. All right. So, I just want to take a few minutes and talk about Dungeons & Dragons, the 5th edition. Now, Dungeons & Dragons, if somebody perchance doesn't know, it's really the role-playing game that kicked it all off. It's I don't think there were any other quote-unquote role-playing games before Dungeons & Dragons came along. Now, there were war games where you had miniatures, and some of that might have had kind of fantasy-based rules or characters. But this concept of I'm going to be this character and I'm going to go crawl through dungeons and, my character is going to level up and get more powerful and, oh, he may die. And, oh, my goodness, I've invested all this time into the character. And you have this group of people sitting around kind of telling a story together with the Dungeon Master and the players. The Dungeon Master is, of course, the person's kind of refereeing the game, telling what's happening, playing all the parts of the characters that are, the non-player characters, if you will, the extras in the world. And so Dungeons & Dragons really just came on the scene in the 70s and just, took off like a rocket. And it captured a lot of people's imaginations. A lot of the computer role-playing games we have today, anywhere from Elder Scrolls to Ultima to Pillars of Eternity, Might and Magic, all these computer wizardry. If it hadn't been for Dungeons & Dragons, we probably wouldn't have had them. So not only, is it massively influential for tabletop role-playing games, and that's where you're actually around a table with pens and paper and dice and all that, but it was massively influential on computer games. So my favorite computer games can trace directly back to Dungeons & Dragons. And of course, that Dungeons & Dragons, a lot of it was based directly on Tolkien, Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit and all that. So, but anyway, so it's the big one. And it's had 5 editions. It's on its 5th edition now. And, the various editions over the years, there's these things called the edition wars where, you have people that are hardcore. This is my favorite edition. Don't change my game, that kind of thing. And then there's other people like me who I do have favorite editions, but I'm always kind of interested in the new edition that's coming out to play with it. Now, I have played every edition of Dungeons & Dragons, including the old basic and expert rules that weren't even advanced, except for 4th edition. I never played 4th edition. I looked at listened to some podcasts, watched some podcasts of it. And I don't know. It was not. I didn't really like it. It seemed like they were trying to take the elements of a online multiplayer RPG, like World of Warcraft or something, and kind of grafting that into D&D. With just the way they were doing the powers and the characters seem overpowered right off the bat. And I'm not necessarily saying that's a bad idea, because if I'm doing D&D and I want to sell more, and I see a lot of people, millions of people playing Warcraft, I'm going to say, well, why don't I try to kind of bring some of this together? I think I can understand where they were coming from. The flavor of it I didn't like. So 5th edition came out, and I bought the books and, did some reviews. In fact, some of my YouTube videos, if you look for Shane Plays on YouTube, I do have, YouTube videos up there that review the Player's Handbook and the Dungeon Master's Guide and the Monster Manual. And those are some of my thousands. I think one of them has like 3,000 or 4,000 people have watched it. So it's a very popular industry, very popular hobby, very popular game. Now, in general, 5th edition has been very well received by the fans, not only for the game system and the mechanics of the game, but also the books look amazing. The artwork, the art direction, the way they look, the way they're laid out, they just look good. I mean, there's a lot of love put into how they are presented. Rules wise, what they've done is they've kind of, it's still, you can't play a role-playing game without doing a little bit of math and rolling some dice and stuff like that. In fact, that's part of what I like about it. I like about how the combat systems work together and the math of it all, but they've scaled it back some to make it kind of streamlined it, make it easier. So, without losing the fact that it's still D&D and, it's not, they haven't oversimplified it to where it's like they aimed it at like 5-year-olds or something like that. I mean, there's still math, there's still rules. My take on it, I have not played as a player, but I have been DMing, dungeon mastering a group for several weeks now at Imagine Games in Sherwood on Tuesday nights, and I like it. And everybody that is playing it with me likes it. It feels good. It feels like D&D. It kind of, and this is subjective, so somebody will disagree with me, and that's fine. I mean, this is subjective. It feels more like 1st edition or whatever than 4th edition seemed to me. It seems like they've managed to update the rules, but kind of get back to this feeling of what D&D is. And they've also, like I said, they've introduced some concepts that encourage role playing. Like you have flaws, and you have, it's not called a motivation. I can't remember what it is off the top of my head. It's like you have motivations, you have flaws, you have backgrounds to your character. And if you play that, you don't have to play that stuff, but if you do, the DM can reward you with something called inspiration, which allows you to have a better chance at an upcoming dice roll if you spend to choose it. So there's little things like that. There's a lot of stuff I could touch on. There's no way. I could, maybe one of these days I'll do a whole show. And in fact, I'm trying to get Chris Perkins, who is called the Dungeon Master to the Stars. He always does the Acquisitions Incorporated DMing that's done once a year, is always really popular on YouTube. And like I said, I could do a whole show on this, but to just sum up, if you've never played D&D and you want to try it out, I think this is a good edition to start with. And if you're wondering, you're like, hey, I haven't messed with 5th edition, should I? I think you should. I really do. I think it's a good edition. It feels good to play. I like what they've done with the rules. They've added some new classes. You could, I don't know. I would recommend it. So far I'm liking it. Now, you're always going to run into something you don't like. And for instance, I could say, they've made it so that if you have a magic potion, all you have to do is dip your finger into it and put it on your tongue, and you can figure out what it is. To me, that's boring. I always liked the knuckle biting drama of, what is this thing? If I drink it, is it going to kill me, or am I going to grow wings and fly, or whatever, stuff like that. But you can always house rule that and change that. They've also introduced this thing called trinkets, which is these neat little, they don't change the game, but every character gets a little trinket. It could be like a gem that's always hot to the touch, or an ancient carved brass owl figurine. I mean, just a little flavor to the game. So maybe one of these days I'll do a whole show just on D&D 5th edition and have people call in. But that's my thoughts on 5th edition, my super quick thoughts. I like it. Check the books out. They're beautiful. There's also a free version of the game. If you go to Dungeons & Dragons or you go to Wizards of the Coast, they're the ones that, do it. Go to their website. There is a fully playable, legal, free version of the game that you can download PDFs and check it out and see if you like it for yourself. So anyway, we're going to take a break. When we come back, we're going to have Brian Bagnall with the Commodore computer author and historian. So don't forget, you can call it 823-0965. That's 501-823-0965. You're welcome to call from out of town. That's not an issue. And you can also tweet me at Shane Place. When we come back, we're going to have Brian.
In business for over 15 years, the Hillcrest Doghouse provides full grooming, bathing, boarding, and daycare services for just about all breeds with knowledgeable and friendly staff, including a licensed groomer with over 10 years experience. The Hillcrest Doghouse uses all natural shampoos, including a pesticide-free flea shampoo. All kennels are situated where we work, which means your companion is rarely left alone, providing the benefit of full interaction with our friendly staff. Additionally, we walk your dog at least 3 times a day to ensure a happy day. Grooming and boarding packages are also available at great prices. The Hillcrest Doghouse is located at 3924 West Markham Street in Little Rock. Call the Hillcrest Doghouse at 501-296-9800. That's 501-296-9800. We're also on Facebook. Find us and like us. Comic book lovers, Michael Tierney's local comic book stores meet all of your comic book needs with friendly service. Visit the comic book store on Treasure Hill Road in Little Rock or Collector's Edition on JFK Boulevard in North Little Rock. And don't forget to click on over to the wildstars.com website. I personally have been a customer of Michael's since the mid-'80s, and I trust him for my reserve list still today. Michael knows comics. In addition to being in business for 34 years, he has written multiple columns for comic magazines, is an Overstreet price guide advisor, and publishes his own comic book series, The Wild Stars. Trust me, these stores are run by a comic book lover for comic book lovers. Remember, for all of your comic book needs with friendly service and to get your copies of The Wild Stars, make sure to visit the comic book store on Treasure Hill Road in Little Rock or Collector's Edition on JFK Boulevard in North Little Rock, and visit thewildstars.com to learn more. Did you know that your business can provide its employees with the same benefits packages as even the largest Fortune 500 companies, often at no direct cost to you, the business owner, and while saving money at the same time? If you've always thought that you would like to offer those big company benefits to your employees but thought that there was no way, let our team at the Macomb Teague Agency come by and show you how it can be possible and how simple it is to put into place. We offer major medical and group and individual plans, on or off exchange, dental and vision, life products, cancer, accident, and more. These benefits create that ever so priceless commodity known as loyalty. And yes, we are ACA certified. We even offer these same benefits on the individual basis if you're just a one-person entrepreneur or making things happen on your own. Give us a call today at 501-838-6827 to schedule your no-obligation on-site consultation. The Macomb Teague Agency is serving all of Arkansas and surrounding states. 501-838-6827. Give us 1% of your trust, and we'll earn the other 99.
Call Chapman Service today for all your air conditioning and electrical concerns. 0% financing till January 2020 for a limited time. Voted best of the best for 5 years in a row. It's hard to stop a train. Chapman Service, all you want in an air conditioning and an electrical company. Nothing you don't.
All right, we are back from that break to pay the bills. I'm one of those darn capitalists. Got to pay the bills. So now I'm excited. We got Brian. Brian, I'm mispronouncing your last name. I know I am. So I'm going to let you say your last name. But this is Brian, insert blank here. And we got Bagnall. Okay, I've been saying Bagnall. So Bagnall. So Brian, so glad to have you on the show. For folks that don't know, and I'm going to throw out, we have a phone number. It's 501-823-0965. 501-823-0965. That's 501-823-0965. And you can call. Doesn't matter if you're long distance. That's fine. You don't have to if you're listening online. And you can also tweet at Shane Plays. But Brian is an author and a historian for Commodore computers, which had a huge impact on the personal computing revolution in the 80s and into the early 90s. And in my opinion, Brian, I'm pretty sure you would agree with me, they don't get the credit and the respect they deserve.
Yeah, they sort of, they went bankrupt in 1994. So, after that, Apple and IBM and Microsoft sort of seemed to get the lion's share of attention, even about the early days. But it is important to remember that in those early days, Commodore really did dominate and sort of set the stage for the rest of home computing.
Right. It was, and that's one of the things I want to talk about your book here in a second. And I want to talk about this. When we first started talking about you coming on the show, I don't think the Kickstarter had even gone yet. So, but I definitely want you to talk about your Kickstarter as well, since there's some serendipity there. But a lot of people, if you ask people about the personal computing revolution, they will tell you that basically Steve Jobs had a conversation with Steve Wozniak, and then Steve Jobs lifted up his leg and a perfectly formed personal computing revolution just popped right out. And that was how it happened, right? That's what a lot of people think.
That's a great way to put it, yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, I do want to give credit to Steve Jobs, and I do want to give credit to Steve Wozniak because, they did some really cool stuff. And Apple has done some really cool products. And they, a lot of people are passionate about them. They were definitely a major part of the personal computing revolution. But when I was growing up in the 80s, all my friends had Commodore 64s. And then they started getting Amigas. Nobody had an Apple. I think the only time I saw an Apple was at school. And like at home, I actually had our first personal computer at home was the TI-99 4A. So, it wasn't just Apple, everybody had Apples. And there's a guy that now what I have here, Brian, I have a book. I have the first edition of the book, On the Edge. Okay. Now it's Commodore, A Company on the Edge. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's sort of being split up. The first book's sort of being split up into two different books with the new content that I'm adding. Okay.
So there was one Christmas where I put on my Amazon wish list, I put this book and I put the Dungeons and Desktops, I think, from Matt Barton. And I don't know if I got them the same year, but I got them both that way. And I was just tickled. I was like, yes, great. I was so excited to get this book because I just have a personal connection and nostalgia and fondness for Commodore computers. And your book is not fluff at all. I mean, you go into detail and you talk to a lot of people. I'm really impressed with this book, and I'm excited to read the updated editions as well. How long this book, now I know you're updating it, but this one, On the Edge, the spectacular rise and fall of Commodore, how long did it take you to interview all these people and write this book?
It took a long time, actually. I think I probably really started dedicating a lot of my time to writing it probably around 2002 or 2003. And it was the first book of that type. I'd written other books before that were more like, how to program in Java and that sort of thing. But this was the first book of that type where I was really trying to, research history, find out what the story was, interview people, get it on paper. And, yeah, I probably started in 2002, 2003 in earnest.
Okay. So
it took a long time. It was, I think, 3 years until I had, something that I thought was good enough to release.
I mean, this thing is just, it's literally overflowing with quotes from interviews. I mean, you talked to a lot of people to make sure that you had the story on what happened. And if people don't know, okay, you had, and I'm really going to give the broad strokes here. Okay. As far as the public goes, as Commodore touched the public, as far as because they were a calculator company, and then is it I've always wanted to ask, is it Trammell or Tramiel, Jack? How do you pronounce that last name?
I've been pronouncing it wrong all these years. Apparently, it's Jack Trammell.
Jack Trammell. Okay, so there was this. They should make a movie about this guy.
Yep.
He was a larger-than-life character, both good and bad. He made incredibly good things happen, but there's people he also just feel incredibly burned by him. Almost kind of sounds like Steve Jobs, but he's not a Steve Jobs character. He's a completely different kind of guy. And he took Commodore from a calculator company into a personal computer company. And he also, he did it in a way he wanted what's called a vertical stack, if I understand right, where he wanted control of the production. He wanted to make his own chips. He wanted to make the computer. So he wanted control over everything. And he kept trying to make that happen. And he kept getting so close and so close and so close, but it never totally quite came together the way he wanted to. But as far as the computer industry or the public goes, you basically, the VIC-20 came out, right? I know you had the PET and all that, but I'm talking about the more, that people may have seen. You had the VIC-20, and then you had the Commodore 64, and that thing took off like crazy. Mm-hmm. I mean, everybody I know, or that had a computer when I was growing up, basically had a Commodore 64. But it was like you could play games on it, you could program on it. Everybody had one. Everyone was doing all kinds of stuff on them. You're doing bulletin boards. They had the old dial-up bulletin board systems and all that. But you hardly ever mention or hear the Commodore 64 mentioned these days.
Yeah, Apple sort of went the route of, very expensive computers that schools could afford. And Steve Jobs was sort of a counterculture kind of guy, and I think his strategy was, with counterculture, you try to hit the young people first. That's how you get in with them. So I think he was trying to get the computers in with very young people, and then he hoped that when they grew up, they would buy Apple products after being exposed to them in school.
But I mean, that didn't have an effect on me or anybody else that I knew.
Well, it may have been your first introduction, possibly. I know it was with mine. But then it was, our family can't afford an Apple computer. And so we went right to the Commodore 64, which was actually, in my opinion, a much better computer than the Apple II in terms of the graphics and sound and what it could do. And it was way, way cheaper. So Commodore kind of benefited from the stage that Apple set there.
Yeah, I mean, that was one of the things that I failed to mention when I was talking about Jack Trammell, or Trammell, is he was like, he wanted to get low-cost computers out there. And that's why he was trying to get this vertical stack of, I want to make my own chips, I want to make my own this, and I'm going to bring it all together and control the costs and get it out there to people. Do you remember, I'm sure it mentions in your book, do you remember what it cost for a Commodore 64 when it first came out?
The initial price, I believe, was $595 in 1982 dollars. Very quickly, I believe in, say, February of 1983, he dropped the price to something like $295, and it just kept going down from there. And that made it irresistible to people to buy.
Right.
And as soon as they got the Commodore 64, they also would often buy a monitor from Commodore and a disk drive. So it worked out really well for Commodore, that business plan.
Yeah, I like I said, the Commodore 64 is basically completely like grafted into my childhood. You can't separate the two. So many people had them, and I just remember having so much fun on them. And then what happened after that? Well, now of course they went through the Commodore 128 and, other kind of upgraded versions of the 64. And then they released what I did just, in my opinion, was just still a mind-blowing computer, which was the Amiga.
Yes.
Tell us about the Amiga. What was so cool and interesting and unique about at the time period that it came out? What was so amazing about the Amiga?
Today, to appreciate what was interesting with the Amiga, you have to realize that back when it was released in 1985, you had like this black and white Macintosh computer that had a nice graphical operating system, but it was black and white and very limited. You also had the IBM PC, which by 1985 was incredibly popular with businesses already. Really established itself as, like just the dominant player there. But again, really, like the sound was almost non-existent. I think it was a speaker buzzer, and the graphics weren't very good. The Commodore 64 was pretty good in graphics and sound, but it was an 8-bit computer. And there was just a big gap in there about, what a computer could be that nobody else was filling. And the Amiga computer came along, and it had photorealistic images. It could do video. The sound was in stereo with, 4-channel stereo sound. So it just blew everything else out of the water, really.
Yeah, just totally blew it out of the water. It was, I remember the first time I saw an Amiga, there were two things that struck me about it. One was how great the graphics were. I mean, the graphics were as good as, like if you went to the arcade at the time. Yeah. And so, because the arcade machines at the time had mind-blowing graphics, home computers didn't. And the Amiga, I was like, that looks just as good, if not better, than stuff I'm seeing at the arcade. And another thing that struck me, it was the first time that I saw a 3.5 floppy, that little hard, floppy. So I've ever since then, I've always associated that floppy with the Amiga, because they were using it before I saw anybody else using it. So, so that was unique and kind of exotic to me, if you will. But the Amiga, like I said, the sound of it, it had amazing right out the, because at the time on an IBM clone, I'm not sure about Macs. I didn't have much interaction with Macs at the time. I know they were coming out with more versions of Macs. But at the time for the IBM clones, which we call Windows now, Windows machine, you had to go get a separate sound card and plug it in if you wanted. And usually those didn't sound as good as the Amiga. So you had to get, you had to plug in a video card to try to get good video. You had to do all these things. And the Amiga just, boom, it showed up. You turned the power on, and there it was. And people, there was a passionate, I guess, user base, fan base immediately. Now, it was somewhat big here in the States, but it was huge in Europe. I think it was even bigger in Europe. It seems like, the research I do, it seems like it took off even larger over there. Would you, did your research kind of show the same thing?
That's the impression I get, yeah. It was fairly popular in the States, but Commodore Commodore in Europe was run by different people there than in the States. It built its reputation around Jack Tramiel running it. And, like you were saying earlier, a lot of people did feel like they were burned. A lot of distributors that felt like they were burned by Commodore. And it just didn't have quite the reputation here that it had in Europe. So it definitely did sell a lot better there. But I'm actually up here in Canada, and I saw quite a few. Like, it seemed like a lot of my friends had the Amiga 500 specifically when they sort of dropped the price a little bit.
That's what my friends had, and that's what I had. So I think that's when, at least in my circle, growing up, that's when it really took off, is when they did the 500, which was, basically the computer and the keyboard were in one unit, one form factor, if you will, and it had a little floppy on the side. But in fact, I used an Amiga for a long time with just two floppy. I never had a hard drive on it, but I had a guy across the hall when I was in the Air Force. A buddy of mine across the hall, and he had the little hard drive expansion you could plug in on the side of the 500. So, so that was, I was like, as far as I was concerned, he had it made. He was. It's
amazing that they could get away without a hard drive back then somehow.
It really is. Yeah, I've got a friend of mine, Nathaniel. I actually visited with him over Memorial Day weekend, and he's just got computers everywhere. And he gave me, gave it to me. He gave me an Amiga 2000, which I've never owned one personally. I've seen them and knew people that had them. And then he gave me an Amiga 500 with a RAM expansion. And I'm still tinkering with him. I've got a keyboard issue on both of them that I'm kind of tinkering around with, trying to figure out. But the 500, keyboard aside, it still will ask for the Workbench disk. and or whatever, and it'll still load up, and it loads the operating system in off a floppy drive.
Yeah.
I mean, and then there's still quite a bit of memory left, to play with. So you can, load other programs, and it's amazing what they were able to do, with that amount of memory. And another thing that always, kind of struck me about the Amiga, I remember, and I think this is the first computer I ever heard of. My computer teacher, when I think I was in 11th or 12th grade, we were all working on Apples, and he had an Amiga at home, and he was telling us about it, how it could expand up to a megabyte of memory. And that was like, I remember I was like, what do you need all that for? And he was getting frustrated with me because he couldn't explain why he needed it. But you did.
Every time we hit like mega or giga or tera, you always wonder, why would you need that much memory? And it turns out you need it.
Yeah, you totally need it. Yeah. So now tell us, what is your personal history with Commodore that you got so into Commodore?
Well, I started off with the Commodore 64. That was what my dad brought home one Christmas for us. And, I was just hooked from there, I guess. And it was really, we didn't upgrade to a PC until probably 1990 or thereabouts, when I started having my own disposable cash.
Right.
And by that time, actually, it was kind of clear, at least in North America, that if you were buying Commodore, it was probably not going to be, a good long-term bet. I don't know what your feeling was in the States, but that's basically how that went. But yeah, I was just really into the Commodore for all those years. I was doing, high school papers and even a little bit of university papers using GEOS, that little operating system that would actually, it was like a GUI operating system that would run on the little Commodore 64, which was a minor miracle in itself.
Yeah, I've heard of that, but I've never actually used it or seen it in the wild.
It's comparable to the Macintosh. Like, it really, looking at them side by side today, there's not a heck of a lot of difference between the two. Although I think back then, one was 16-bit, one was 8-bit. People would say, oh, the Macintosh is heads and tails better than GEOS. But looking at today, especially if you put a little bit of a memory expansion unit in the Commodore 64, they're quite comparable.
Huh. Okay, well, we've got, I want to throw out, just in case people want to ask a question, our number is 501-823-0965. And people can tweet me at Shane Plays, but that's 501-823-0965. Brian, what I want to do now is I want to let you talk about your Kickstarter. Like I said, I didn't have you on specifically for your Kickstarter, but it just so happens you have one. So why don't you tell us a little bit about your Kickstarter that you're running right now on, is, if I remember right, it's the Amiga years, which I personally have pledged to support. So,
yeah, thank you for that. Thank you for that support as well. This Kickstarter, I'm getting funds together to produce my next book. The previous book I released in 2010, so there's actually been about a 5-year gap between those books. And I have been working on it a little bit. I got about 2/3 of the Amiga years completed. And I just felt, with the rise of Kickstarter and seeing how other projects were able to launch very well through Kickstarter, I thought this is probably the way to go. And, I'm really happy with the whole Kickstarter platform. I think it's just an amazing thing.
Well, you blew past your goal, which is good. I mean, it shows that, there's a desire for more of what you're doing. Now, and then you've also added some stretch goals, I think, with a second book. I know you were, what is the second book that you're offering as kind of a stretch goal?
Yeah, the second book, when I was telling you at the beginning of this interview how I was working on it from, say, 2002 to 2005. And when I was done that stretch, I had over 800 pages of material completed.
Okay.
And it had everything going back to the very beginning of Commodore, covering Commodore. Actually, not a lot of people know this probably, but they used to sell typewriters, and then they sold adding machines, and that naturally led into calculators and microchips, and then they got into computers. And it's a very interesting story, actually, for all that the stuff that went on at that time. Jack Tramiel is a super interesting guy during the computer years.
Very interesting. Yeah.
Yes.
Super interesting. They could make a movie about him, and they have to have Bill Hurd in that movie too. I didn't even get to talk about Bill Hurd, man. That guy, it's like this. He was a Commodore employee that was working on computers for Commodore. He wasn't in management or anything like that. But this guy, he's like a character that a fiction writer makes up. And
you wouldn't believe he could exist in real life.
Yeah, you read the book just to hear about Bill Hurd. I mean, the guy's amazing. I'd love to talk to him sometime. But yeah, I just loved Bill Hurd, and it's just all his adventures and misadventures as a Commodore employee. So,
he'll be featured actually in the Amiga years. He was in the other, like he designed the Plus 4 and, the computer that bombed there, but he goes on to design this Commodore 128, and that will be covered in the Amiga years.
Very cool. Well, I pledged. And the music's about to start for the end of the show, Brian. You don't have to drop off right then. We got started a couple of minutes late with the way our breaks shaped up, so I'm going to keep you through the end of the show. Kendall, when that music comes up, if you can just kind of ease it down. But yeah, so it's another thing I wanted to mention about your Kickstarter. Who did the computer animation for your pitch video?
I have to take credit for that.
Okay, I'm really impressed. What did you do that on? Did you do that on an Amiga or?
I actually did that with Flash animation, and that was my first time using Flash. I had no experience with it prior to that, and I actually have no experience with pixel art, but I had to recreate. If you look at the art and you compare it to it's a spoof for listeners out there. It's sort of a send-up of the introduction to a game called Zach McCracken.
Right, yeah, because you zoom in on the Zach McCracken poster, and then you go into this dream sequence where you're running around inside basically an old Commodore game, like an adventure game. Now, was that supposed to be Jack Tramiel, the business guy sitting behind the desk?
It was, yeah.
Okay.
I wanted to leave that a little bit nebulous in the video because I wasn't sure how good my art was. I didn't want anyone to think I was being disrespectful.
All right, Brian, we got to run. People, Commodore, the Amiga years. Brian, go look it up on Kickstarter. Check it out. Brian, thanks for being on the show. We are going out. That is a wrap. Brian, thanks so much for your time, man. I really appreciate you.
It's been a pleasure, Shane.